Right now, as you watch this video, millions of Americans are unknowingly participating in what could be the most sophisticated invasion in human history. Not a single shot has been fired. Not one soldier has crossed our borders. Yet the influence is spreading faster than any military campaign could ever achieve. Every swipe on your phone, every purchase you make, every digital transaction flowing through our economy is part of a network that reaches directly back to Beijing. If you're not subscribing to this channel yet, hit that button now, because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you see the relationship between America and China. The traditional definition of invasion involves armies, tanks, and battlefields. But what happens when the battlefield becomes our economy, our technology, and our daily digital lives? What happens when the weapons of choice are apps, investment dollars, and supply chains instead of guns and missiles? This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented reality unfolding in real time. And the implications for American sovereignty are staggering. Walk through any American neighborhood today and you'll witness this invasion in action. The smartphone in your pocket likely contains dozens of Chinese-made components. The electric vehicle charging in your driveway runs on batteries manufactured in Chinese facilities. The social media app your teenager can't live without processes its data through servers that ultimately connect back to Chinese parent companies. Even as recent as this September, we've seen the ongoing battle over TikTok, where a deal has been reached between the Trump administration and China to keep TikTok operational in the United States, with about 80% of TikTok's U.S. business owned by an investor consortium that includes Oracle, Silver Lake, and Andreessen Horowitz. The scope of this digital integration runs deeper than most Americans realize. Every time you order a product online, there's a significant chance it originates from a Chinese manufacturer. Every time you stream a video, use a navigation app, or even charge your electric car, you're interfacing with technology and infrastructure that has Chinese fingerprints throughout its development and supply chain. This isn't happening by accident. It's the result of decades of strategic planning and execution. Consider the mathematics of economic influence. By 2024, China's trade surplus had increased across all regions. Asia by 26%, Europe by 51%, North America by 171%, and Latin America by 15%. That 171% increase in North American trade surplus represents billions of dollars flowing from American consumers and businesses directly into Chinese economic systems. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they represent a fundamental shift in economic power and dependency. The first major front of this economic invasion centers on technological dominance and data control. Every major technology sector in America now depends heavily on Chinese manufacturing, Chinese components, or Chinese software. From the semiconductors that power our computers to the rare earth minerals that make our smartphones function, Chinese companies have positioned themselves as indispensable links in virtually every technological supply chain that matters to American consumers and businesses. The recent TikTok negotiations perfectly illustrate this technological entanglement. Despite years of national security concerns and congressional legislation designed to force the sale of the platform, an American version of the popular app will be partly owned by a consortium of Trump-allied investors, with Chinese shareholders holding about 20% of the stake. Even in a deal designed to reduce Chinese control, Beijing maintains significant influence over a platform used by over 170 million Americans daily. But the technological invasion extends far beyond social media platforms. Chinese companies have invested heavily in American artificial intelligence startups, cloud computing infrastructure, and semiconductor design companies. These investments don't just provide capital, they provide access to American innovation, research data, and technological secrets that can be leveraged for competitive advantage. When a Chinese venture capital firm invests in an American AI startup, they're not just buying equity, they're buying insights into American technological development that can benefit Chinese competitors. The smartphone industry provides a perfect case study of this technological dependence. While Americans proudly carry phones branded as American innovations, the reality is far more complex. The batteries come from Chinese manufacturers, the rare earth minerals are processed in Chinese facilities, and many of the most advanced components are manufactured in Chinese factories. Even phones assembled in other countries rely on Chinese suppliers for critical components. This means that China has significant leverage over the most personal and essential technology device most Americans use daily. Cloud computing represents another frontier of this technological invasion. Major American companies store their data and run their operations on cloud platforms that rely heavily on hardware manufactured in China. When an American business uploads sensitive data to the cloud, that information travels through networks and sits on servers that contain Chinese manufactured components. The implications for corporate espionage and data security are enormous, yet most businesses remain unaware of these vulnerabilities. The second front involves financial systems and investment patterns that are reshaping American economic independence. Chinese investment in American companies, real estate, and infrastructure has grown exponentially over the past 2 decades. This isn't just about buying American assets, it's about gaining influence over American economic decision-making. When Chinese companies acquire American businesses, they gain access to customer data, technological innovations, and strategic insights that can benefit Chinese competitors and government interests. Chinese sovereign wealth funds and state-controlled companies have invested billions of dollars in American real estate markets, particularly in major metropolitan areas. These investments drive up property values, making housing less affordable for American families while concentrating wealth and influence in Chinese hands. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, Chinese investment has become a significant factor in local real estate markets, affecting everything from rental prices to development patterns. The financial invasion also operates through more subtle mechanisms. Chinese banks and financial institutions have established significant presences in American markets, providing loans and financial services to American businesses and consumers. This creates financial dependencies that can be leveraged for political and economic influence. When American companies depend on Chinese financing for their operations, they become vulnerable to pressure that can affect their business decisions and strategic directions. Perhaps most concerning is the integration of Chinese payment systems and financial technologies into American commerce. Chinese-developed payment platforms and financial apps are gaining popularity among American consumers, particularly in immigrant communities and among younger demographics. These platforms don't just process transactions, they collect detailed data about spending patterns, financial behaviors, and economic preferences that can be analyzed for strategic advantage. The venture capital ecosystem provides another avenue for financial influence. Chinese investment firms have become major players in American startup funding, particularly in the technology sector. When Chinese investors fund American startups, they gain access to cutting-edge research, innovative technologies, and strategic business intelligence. This information flows back to China, where it can benefit Chinese competitors and enhance Chinese technological capabilities. The third front focuses on supply chain control and manufacturing dependencies that have made American consumers and businesses increasingly reliant on Chinese production. China is the third largest export market for the United States, behind Canada and Mexico, with U.S. exports exceeding $195 billion in 2024, while the $295 billion U.S. trade deficit with China remains the United States' largest trade deficit. This massive trade imbalance represents more than just economic statistics. It reveals a fundamental dependency that affects American economic security. The manufacturing invasion operates through multiple channels. Chinese companies have become the dominant suppliers for countless consumer products that Americans use daily. From clothing and electronics to furniture and appliances, Chinese manufacturing has captured market share through a combination of low prices, government subsidies, and strategic dumping practices. This hasn't happened by accident. It represents decades of deliberate economic strategy designed to create dependencies and eliminate competition. The automotive industry illustrates the complexity of these supply chain dependencies. Even American car manufacturers rely heavily on Chinese suppliers for components ranging from electronics and batteries to steel and aluminum. As the industry shifts toward electric vehicles, this dependency is intensifying because China controls much of the global supply chain for lithium batteries, rare earth minerals, and other critical EV components. American automakers find themselves increasingly dependent on Chinese suppliers for the technologies that will define the future of transportation. Pharmaceutical manufacturing represents perhaps the most critical supply chain vulnerability. Chinese companies have become major suppliers of active pharmaceutical ingredients, generic drugs, and medical devices used throughout the American healthcare system. During the COVID-19 pandemic, these dependencies became glaringly obvious as supply chain disruptions threatened access to essential medications and medical equipment. Yet even after these vulnerabilities were exposed, American pharmaceutical companies continue to rely heavily on Chinese manufacturing because of cost advantages and established supply relationships. The electronics industry shows how deeply embedded these dependencies have become. Chinese companies don't just manufacture consumer electronics, they control significant portions of the global supply chains for semiconductors, display screens, batteries, and other critical components. When Americans purchase electronics from supposedly American or European brands, they're often buying products that are predominantly Chinese in their manufacturing origin and component sourcing. Agricultural dependencies represent another dimension of supply chain control. While America remains a major agricultural producer, Chinese companies have invested heavily in American farmland, food processing facilities, and agricultural technology companies. These investments give Chinese entities significant influence over American food production and distribution systems. Moreover, American farmers have become increasingly dependent on Chinese markets for their export sales, creating vulnerabilities that can be exploited for political leverage. The fourth and perhaps most insidious front involves cultural influence and information control that shapes how Americans think about China, politics, and global affairs. The recent TikTok developments demonstrate how this influence operates in practice. White House press secretary revealed details of a deal reached with China over control of TikTok, sharing that 6 Americans will sit on the 7-seat board. Yet questions remain about algorithm control and data flow that could influence what content American users see and engage with. Social media platforms represent the most visible aspect of this cultural invasion. Chinese-owned platforms like TikTok have captured massive American audiences, particularly among younger demographics who represent the future of American political and cultural leadership. These platforms don't just entertain, they shape opinions, influence political views, and create cultural trends that can be subtly manipulated to benefit Chinese interests. The algorithms that determine what content users see can be adjusted to promote certain viewpoints while suppressing others. Educational influence operates through multiple channels, including university partnerships, student exchange programs, and academic research collaborations. Chinese government-funded Confucius Institutes have established footholds at American universities, ostensibly to promote Chinese language and culture education. However, critics argue these institutes serve as platforms for Chinese government propaganda and intelligence gathering. Even after many universities have closed their Confucius Institutes due to security concerns, Chinese influence in American academia continues through other mechanisms. Hollywood and entertainment industry partnerships represent another avenue for cultural influence. Chinese companies have invested heavily in American movie studios, production companies, and entertainment platforms. These investments often come with subtle or explicit expectations about content that might be offensive to Chinese audiences or government sensibilities. American filmmakers increasingly consider Chinese market reactions when developing content, effectively giving Chinese cultural and political preferences influence over American entertainment. The gaming industry provides yet another channel for cultural influence. Chinese gaming companies have acquired or invested in major American game developers and publishers. Popular video games played by millions of Americans are now owned or influenced by Chinese companies, creating opportunities to shape cultural narratives and collect detailed data about American gaming preferences and behaviors. These games often include subtle cultural messaging and can be used to normalize certain political viewpoints or cultural practices. News, media, and information platforms represent perhaps the most concerning aspect of cultural influence. Chinese companies have invested in American media properties and digital platforms that shape how Americans receive and interpret news about global affairs. While direct censorship is rare, subtle influences can affect editorial decisions, story selection, and analytical perspectives. When Americans consume news and information through platforms with Chinese ownership or investment, they may be receiving content that has been subtly influenced by Chinese interests. The invasion extends into professional networking and business information platforms. Chinese companies have developed or acquired platforms used by American professionals for networking, job searching, and business development. These platforms collect detailed professional information about millions of Americans, creating comprehensive databases that can be analyzed for economic intelligence and talent recruitment. The data collected through these platforms provides insights into American business strategies, professional trends, and economic developments that can benefit Chinese competitors. Looking at the current economic landscape, the scope of this invasion becomes even more apparent. The U.S. economy expanded by 2.8% in 2024, slightly below the 2.9% growth in 2023, driven by consumer spending, business investment, government expenditures, and net exports. Though challenges such as a widening trade deficit, slowing investment, and global uncertainty continue to create vulnerabilities that can be exploited through economic dependencies and strategic influence operations. The implications of this multifaceted invasion are staggering. Unlike traditional military invasions that can be clearly identified and directly opposed, this economic and technological invasion operates through seemingly legitimate business relationships, investment partnerships, and consumer choices. Every American participation in these systems strengthens the very networks that are designed to increase Chinese influence and reduce American independence. The challenge for American policymakers and citizens is that traditional responses to foreign threats are inadequate for addressing this type of invasion. Military responses are irrelevant when the threat operates through economic relationships and technological dependencies. Diplomatic protests are ineffective when the invasion operates through private companies and market mechanisms. Even regulatory responses are complicated because they risk disrupting economic relationships that American consumers and businesses have become dependent upon. The path forward requires a fundamental reconceptualization of national security that accounts for economic dependencies, technological vulnerabilities, and cultural influences that didn't exist in previous eras. Americans must recognize that their daily choices as consumers, investors, and technology users have national security implications. The smartphone you choose, the apps you download, the products you purchase, and the investment decisions you make all contribute to either strengthening or weakening American economic independence. This invasion succeeds because it offers immediate benefits to American consumers and businesses. Chinese products are often cheaper, Chinese apps are often more entertaining, and Chinese investment often provides capital that might not be available from domestic sources. The challenge is that these short-term benefits come with long-term costs in terms of economic dependency, technological vulnerability, and political influence that may not become apparent until it's too late to reverse course. The question facing America today isn't whether this invasion is occurring. The evidence is overwhelming that it is. The question is whether Americans will recognize the implications before the dependencies become so entrenched that they cannot be reversed without significant economic disruption. The window for maintaining American economic and technological independence may be narrowing, but it hasn't closed entirely. The choices made in the coming years will determine whether America maintains its sovereignty or becomes increasingly subject to Chinese economic and political influence.